Hello everyone, welcome back to the course Strategic Management Accounting. This is part 2 of the topic 2, Reconceptualizing Competition, Discourses of Competitive Advantage and Strategic Positioning. In the previous lecture, which was the part 1 of this particular topic, we discussed how competition and strategy was conceptualized in the classical models of corporate planning, corporate strategy, and scientific management. As we discussed there, at the very beginning of the evolution of management in the form of scientific management, the focal attention was on the labor process. The synchronization and rationalization of the labor process in order to enhance the efficiency with which labor is connected with the machinery. At that pace, we discussed, the notion of strategy was not explicit. It was only implicit in the sense that strategy is or was to enhance the efficiency with which the labor is synchronized with the machine to achieve economies of scale. Then, since the beginning of the 20th century, through waves of mergers and acquisitions, we explained, corporations evolved into what we called the M form or multidivisional enterprises. It was in the context of these multidivisional enterprises, the corporate planning or corporate strategy started to emerge as the functionality of the corporate head office. As corporate planners, managers in the corporate head office faced three fundamental issues: how to coordinate and consolidate independently operating divisions. And second one was the problem of environment, creating a strategic alignment between the external environmental dynamics and the internal environmental factors. And thirdly, there was the issue or the challenge of further growth and expansion of the firm, the problem of diversification. And we explained how various corporate planning and strategic planning models evolved to address these three issues. So we paid our attention to a specific set of tools and frameworks such as BCG, growth share metrics, GE 9-cell metrics, SWOT analysis framework, PEST analysis framework, PESTEL analysis framework, Eiger-Ansoff growth share metrics, McKinsey's 7S framework, and so on. So the key point we discussed there was all these frameworks, all these conceptions of strategy and corporate planning or corporate policy came into being to address those three issues. The issue of how to coordinate and consolidate independently operating business entities, and the problem of the environment, creating a strategic fit between internal environment and the external environment, and the problem of diversification. So we also discussed that at that particular pace of development of corporate planning or corporate strategy, the focal managerial attention was on managing the corporation as a totality. So having that background, now in this particular lecture, we are moving to Michael Porter's contribution to strategic management. How Porterian discourses reconceptualized the notion of competition and strategy. As we discussed in our very first lecture, under the topic strategic turn, since 1970s, there was neoliberalization of politics, globalization of markets and hierarchies, and the digitalization and virtualization of technologies and management. So with this particular context, as we discussed in the very first lecture, the primary attention of management has now been shifted to the market, strategizing in the market. So at the very beginning of the emergence of management in the modern form as scientific management, the attention was on the labor process. Then, since the beginning of the 20th century until 1970s, the primary attention shifted to the management of the organization or the hierarchy as a totality. Now, the attention has been shifted to the market. So in this context, strategy is now being seen as positioning in the market. So strategy as positioning. So that is what Michael Lee Porter fundamentally populated and popularized. So in this lecture, our primary attention or our learning objective is to explain how Michael Lee Porter's contributions reconceptualized the strategy as positioning. So that is what we are going to achieve in this particular lecture. Strategy frameworks and concepts that we discussed so far emanated from the field of management, organizational studies, or the management consultancy. In comparison to them, Michael Lee Porter's contributions have a background of industrial economics. Therefore, in order to have a comparative understanding of how Michael Lee Porter's contributions reconceptualized the notion of strategy and competition, we need to have a brief discussion on how the competition and strategy was conceptualized in industrial economics. There's a particular framework according to which the competition and strategy was conceptualized in industrial economics. That is the structure, conduct, performance model. So according to this model, a firm's behavior, firm's conduct, which is the strategy, is determined by the structural conditions. So the structure is conceptualized as the ultimate determinant of the manner in which a firm would make its decisions, such as, for example, pricing decisions, quantities to be produced, the production capacity to be utilized, and the level of quality to be incorporated into the product or services. So such decisions are conceived as or conceptualized as the firm's conduct or the strategy. And such strategies or the conduct is ultimately determined by the particular industrial structure or the market structure in which the firm operates. For example, if the market structure is a perfectly competitive market condition, the firm is understood to be a price taker. Similarly, if the market structure is an oligopolistic market structure, then the firm would have rather relatively permanent pricing strategy. So it will hold its price for a long time, what we call the price stickiness. So like that, So the industrial economist and the neoclassical economist in general creates a particular connection between the conduct of the firm or the strategy of the firm and the structure. Structure being the ultimate determinant, and the firm is simply an economic entity that responds to the structural conditions. And then the performance is conceptualized not at the level of the firm, but at the level of the industry, as the collective performance of all the firms in a given market or industry. So the notions such as technical efficiency, distributive efficiency, industry profitability, industry innovativeness were the common criteria according to which the performance was assessed. So the focal attention of the industrial economist was not on the firm but on the industry to improve the efficiency of the industry by modifying the structural conditions, because the firm would simply respond to the structural conditions. So the macroeconomic policies, industrial economic policies are directed toward restructuring the industries, regulating the industries so that the industry can be pushed towards perfect competition, because they understood or because they believed it is the perfect competition which ultimately brings the optimum conduct of the firm, which create equilibrium or optimum performance of the industry. So that is how the industrial economist conceptualized the connection between the structure, the conduct or the strategy, and the performance. And in this particular model, the firm did not have any strategic agency. Firm is simply conceptualized as a price taker or a social entity or economic entity simply responding to the structural conditions. And Michael Porter started to bring his contributions by revising this particular model, by providing a strategic agency to the firm, by articulating and arguing that the firm has a power. The firm has the capacity to change the structural conditions that the firm faces. Therefore, strategy for Michael Lee Porter is the manner in which a firm would rearrange or recreate the structural conditions so that the firm will have the ability, capacity, or the opportunity of earning an abnormal gain. For Michael Lee Porter, it is what he calls the competitive advantage. So the firm can write back to the structure and change the structure so that the firm can have a competitive advantage, and which will lead to a different sort of performances. And the performances will again provide the capacity for the firm to act strategically to change the structural condition that the firm is facing. So for Michael Lee Porter, strategy is ultimately a set of decisions that the firm would take in order to change the structural conditions that the firm is facing. So that is, in a sense, repositioning the firm in a structural condition which the firm itself is trying to change for its own advantage. So in this sense, Michael Lee Porter's contribution is starting with this repositioning of the firm's capacity. And then to reconceptualize this whole structure, conduct, performance model, he brings in a series of new models and concepts, such as the notion of competitive advantage, the notion of generic strategies, industry analysis framework, value chain framework, and so on. So we will discuss them in this particular lecture. Porter's schema of strategy begins with a fundamental economic concept, the concept of competitive advantage, which, as Porter defines, is the capacity of a firm or of a nation to outperform its competitors for a sustainable period of time. This concept, therefore, tries to answer the question, how and why a firm or a nation can outperform its competitors. And this question has always been an interesting question for economists. It has been answered partially by various international trade theories. For example, the theory of absolute advantage, the theory of comparative advantage, and the theory of factor endowment. Porter then provides an alternative, different perspective for this question by bringing the notion of strategy to the forefront of the analysis. For Porter, one's capacity to outperform its competitors depends by and large on the specific set of strategies that he or she would follow. A firm's capacity to outperform its competitors is a matter of the strategies that the firm would follow. A nation's capacity to outperform its competitors is a matter of the specific set of strategies that the firms of that nation would follow. While acknowledging that the factor endowment, availability of resources, and also the opportunity cost with which goods and services are produced do play a significant role, Porter argues that it is the strategy that fundamentally determines a firm's or the nation's competitive advantage. And for Porter, the most fundamental economic problem, the most fundamental political problem that the nations are facing today is nothing else but the problem of competitiveness or the losing competitiveness. Porter has been writing for many decades now, arguing and emphasizing that the US and other European economies are losing their competitiveness. The problem is competitiveness. So once, for example, by addressing a special committee of the US Senate about unemployment problem, Porter says, to quote him, the problem is not the jobs per se, but the competitiveness. Therefore, the nations, its leaders, its thinkers, its business leaders and the businesses, everybody should try to enhance the competitiveness of the firms, competitiveness of the nation. So for Porter, It is only through enhancing the competitiveness, all other social problems, all other economic problems, all other political problems can be resolved. So he brings the notion of competitiveness and the competitive advantage as a very critical problem to the forefront of the political arena, to the forefront of the economic policy making. Then, by articulating the argument that it is the strategies that ultimately determine one's competitive advantage, he brings the notion of strategy to the forefront of the political arena, to the forefront of economic policy making. Making the strategy is not simply a problem of the business, but it is the problem of the nation. Everybody's problem. So that's how he connects the notion of competitive advantage with the notion of strategy. By doing that, he simultaneously places and signifies the notions of strategy and the competitiveness as a political problem, as an economic problem, as well as a managerial problem. So simultaneously, competitiveness and strategy are managerial issues, political issues, and economic issues. He put them all together through these two notions, competitiveness and the strategy. Competitiveness as the problem, competitive advantage as the aim, the thing that we have to incorporate, develop within us, and the strategy as the mean to do that. Porter then analyzes the notion of competitive advantage at two levels. First, he analyzes with his famous book, The Competitive Advantage of a Nation, the competitive advantage at the level of macroeconomy or the nation. And he got a famous model, what he calls the diamond model. So you go into this diamond model, there are 6 basic factors that would determine the competitive advantage of a nation. The institutional infrastructure, the political infrastructure to support the healthy growth and development of business enterprises is one factor. The supporting infrastructure, the supporting institutions. And then factor conditions, whether the nation have access to some critical factors of production, some critical resources, not only the physical resources but also the human and intellectual resources. And then also the demand conditions, whether the internal market of the nation is big enough, good enough, solid enough to promote a good business environment, to promote a good set of growing, innovating business enterprises. And then the supporting role of the government, whether the political state, whether the government is providing the necessary political support for all the other factors to emerge, all the other factors to sustain. And then also the mere chance, timing. That is also a factor for Porter. However, more than these factors, what is more critical, what is most important for Porter to develop the nation's competitive advantage is the specific set of the firms adopt and the structure of rivalry within which the nation's firms grew up, emerge, and evolve. So that is the most critical factor for Porter. And that is what for Porter ultimately determine the competitive advantage of a nation. Yes, he acknowledged all other factors are important, but not as important as this condition. The capacity of the firms to come out with the appropriate strategies and the specific structure of rivalry within which the firms grew, emerged, and evolved into competitive business entities. And that is the point, or that is the condition then which connects the macroeconomic conditions of competitive advantage with the micro-organizational factors. So, he makes initially a clarification, explanation about the competitive advantage as a macroeconomic issue. Then he brings that macroeconomic issue of competitiveness, competitive advantage, down to an issue of managerial issue of the firm, at the level of the firm. So when it comes to the level of the firm, and how can a firm develop an appropriate set of strategies, depends on 4 key elements. One is, as we already mentioned, the rivalry structure, the industrial structure within which the firms compete. For that, he brings a model. For that, he brings a different analytical model that's called Michael Porter's 5 forces industry analysis model. And then, next factor that determine the strategic choices of the firm is the generic strategies available for a firm. So Michael Lee Porter talks about 3 specific or 3 generic strategies that the firms can adopt: cost leadership, differentiation, and focus. So we will talk about them later. And then he also talk about the internal structure, the value chain of a firm. So value chain, or the internal process structure of a firm, is also a key element that determines the type of strategies that a firm can adopt. Then finally, he got another analytical framework, that is the analysis of the competitors, the immediate competitive environment. So in that way, in order to bring down that the macroeconomic problem of competitiveness, the macroeconomic problem of competitive advantage down to the organizational level, he comes out with 4 interrelated strategy frameworks. The first one is the 5 forces analysis of the industry. And second one is the generic strategies model, the model of generic strategies. And then the model of value chain. And then finally, the framework for analyzing the immediate competition. So this is the overall schema, overall strategy schema that Porter promoted. So to summarize it, Porter starts his grand schema of strategy with the notion of competitive advantage and articulate that it is the strategy which matters. It is the strategy which ultimately determines a firm and thereby nation's competitive advantage. At the macro level, the competitive advantage of a nation can depend upon 6 different factors, interrelated factors. Of these 6 interrelated factors, the most critical is the strategies that the firms adopt and the structure of rivalry within which the firms emerge and evolve and compete. And that is the factor, or condition through which the macroeconomic problem is connected with the micro-organizational dynamics. Then when it comes to the micro-organizational analysis of strategy, micro-organizational level designing and implementation of strategy, there are 4 key conceptual frameworks to deal with. One is analyzing the industry, that is Porter's 5 forces framework. Understanding the generic strategies available to a firm, Porter's generic strategies. Analyzing the internal value creation system, value chain model, and then analyzing the immediate competitive conditions, the Porter's 4-corner analysis of competition. And we will take each of these and discuss in brief what and how they can implicate on strategic analysis and some management accounting calculations. Then, when it comes to the determination of strategies, Porter identifies that there are 2 generic strategies which can be applied either in a narrow market scope or a broad market scope. Accordingly, a firm can adopt a cost leadership strategy in a narrow market scope or a broad market scope. Alternatively, a firm can adopt a differentiation strategy in a narrow market scope or a broad market scope. In any case, for Porter, strategy is positioning the firm's brand name, product or services in a unique manner in the market. It is about positioning the firm's brand, product or services in such a manner that the customers can differentiate, the customers can identify that brand, that product or that service as a unique, a differentiating product compared to its competitors' products. So in an overall sense, the focal point of strategy is how do you create a difference? How do you position your product as a unique product? And this uniqueness, this differentiation can be achieved either through the cost or through any other mean other than the cost. So if you differentiate your product on the basis of the price or the cost, then you call it the cost leadership. So you are going to tell to the customers, your product is a reasonably well competitive, acceptable quality product, but with a very low price tag. So you are going to say to the customer, you are going to get a better value for your product because you offer your product at a lower price. So the price and the cost is the fundamental mean through which you differentiate your product from the competitor's product. For example, Toyota used this particular strategy very effectively for many decades. On the other hand, if you are trying to differentiate your product, not on the basis of price or the cost, but on the basis of other features such as the quality, product features, product dimensions, and so on, then your strategy is called a differentiation strategy. So in either case, whether it is cost or any other means of differentiation, your focal attention is how do you differentiate, how do you position your product as a unique product in the market. You can do it either through the dimension of cost and the price or any other means of differentiation. In a broader sense, that's what Porter means by strategy: positioning the product in the market in a unique manner. When it comes to the customer's decision to buy a product, when it comes to your capacity to reach the customer and to have a competitive advantage and to generate a larger market share, one of the fundamental economic concepts is the concept of value for money. So ultimately, one way or the other, you have to offer value for money. So what do we mean by value for money? Is the ratio between two things. First, as the numerator, you have the package of benefit, quality, and the product features that you offer to the customer through your product or service. That is the numerator. The ultimate benefit, quality, features, usefulness, and so on that the customers would get by consuming, by using, or by owning that product, including, for example, the prestige or loyalty, and so on. And then, as the denominator, you have the price. How much customers have to pay to get that particular package of benefit, value, and so on. So this ratio is the ultimate criteria according to which a customer would ultimately decide. Some customers might be more sensitive towards price, whereas others do not be that sensitive towards the price, but they want more of the numerator rather than the denominator. Now, if you are following a cost leadership strategy, your focal attention is on the denominator of this ratio, the price, the cost. So while holding the numerator, the value package, the quality package, the benefit package at a constant level, at a certain acceptable level, at a par value in the market. Not a defective product, but an acceptable good product. Not a superior product, but acceptable good product. So while holding your product value package at that level, you drop the price down through rigorous cost management strategies. Then overall ratio you are creating, the value for money would be better, would be bigger than your competitors. So to repeat it again, you are trying to still create a bigger, larger value for money for the customer by holding the numerator of the ratio at an acceptable level, but by reducing the denominator of the ratio as much as possible. And as a consequence, still you offer a greater value for the customer. That's what exactly Toyota did. Toyota's cars are not defective, they are not bad, they are good products. And they are not trying to push that product as a superior product, as a high brand product, but an acceptable, very good quality product. But the customers can buy at a very cheaper price, especially for third world countries. That's how Toyota managed to offer that particular strategy, cost leadership strategy. On the other hand, if you are trying to have a differentiation strategy, you are not that much worried about the denominator. You are trying to push your numerator up and up and up by having a superior premium quality, by having superior product features, by having exclusive product features, a certain product features that no any other product in the market would have it. For example, if you think about digital SLR cameras and the video cameras, now for example, Sony is trying to push their products having a specific feature, such as, for example, frame per rate per second, having a 4K video at 120 frames per second that many other cameras can't offer. So your attention is on the numerator, on the value package, on the specific unique features that the product can offer to you. And therefore, because of that particular feature, you would believe that the customers are happy and ready and willing to pay a higher price. Still you offer value for money. Still you offer a greater value for money. So that's how these two strategies operate in as an economic concept. Now, when it comes to ultimate decision regarding which kind of strategy you should follow, whether you should follow cost leadership strategy or differentiation strategy in a broader market scope or a narrower market scope, you have to pursue, you have to have a set of strategic analysis. So these decisions about strategy, the choosing among these generic strategies is a matter of how your analysis is carried out in three different areas. As we already mentioned, the first analysis is that you have to analyze the industry structure, the overall structure of rivalry within which the firm compete, within which the firm operates. And this overall industry structure of rivalry has to be understood by certain parameters beyond the immediate competitors. So this is where Michael Lee Porter's 5 forces analysis of the industry comes into play. So according to this particular model, 5 forces model, the rivalry structure, industry structure, composed of 5 key forces. At the center of it, as you see here, there is the rivalry among the existing firm, the nature of the competition between competitors, the firms. And that nature of rivalry, is it a rivalry through product pricing, or is it a rivalry through advertising? Is it dominatingly a competition manifested by product quality? That all depends on 4 other key variables, 4 other key forces. Threat of substitutes, threat of new entrants, the bargaining power of the suppliers, and the bargaining power of the buyers. Analyzing these 5 forces is very critical in deciding what sort of a strategy that you are going to follow. For example, if you are trying to adopt a cost leadership strategy as Toyota did, then you should have high degree of bargaining power over your suppliers. So you should be able to dictate the terms to your suppliers. So you should have a wonderfully connected supply network. All raw materials and other parts and components can be provided to you by your suppliers at a reasonable or a very low cost, at a target cost that you specify, at a particular time that you specify, so that you can maintain just-in-time inventories. So you have a target costing system into which all your suppliers are connected, and you can dictate the terms to them. If you don't have that kind of a bargaining power over your suppliers, then it will be quite difficult for you to control the price, reduce the cost. So if you want to follow cost minimization strategy, cost leadership strategy, that is a very critical factor, whether you have a bargaining power over your suppliers. Then, similarly, the cost leadership strategy would be a wonderful strategy if your buyers are more sensitive towards price and if they have bargaining power over you through price. So therefore they dictate the price and you have to reduce the price. And you should be able to keep on reducing your cost through your supply chain, through your value chain. Similarly, there should not be new entrants, new substitute in the next year or so. In other words, the manner in which you achieve your cost leadership cannot be easily imitated. So if anybody else want to produce this particular product or service at a similar cost as you, then they have to have all these supplier connections, all these production systems and all these technologies and so on. It shouldn't be that easy. So the new entrants, threat of substitutes at a lower cost should be very, very low. Otherwise, your cost leadership strategy wouldn't long last. It wouldn't be a source of competitive advantage for a sustainable period of time. Similarly, if you are thinking about differentiation, then you should have a certain domination, bargaining power over your suppliers to dictate the terms of quality. And you should have a very good, high quality component suppliers, raw material suppliers. And such a quality should not be able to be imitated easily. So the new threats of entrants and new threats of substitutes should be very, very minimal. And your buyers are demanding not the cost, not the price, but the quality. So you are serving a particular market segment where the customers are more keen about the quality, the benefit package, the value package, and the product features. And you are the only one who can offer that particular product feature because of the type of connections that you have with your suppliers. So that is how you analyze the industry. The analyzing the industry using 5 forces model, according to Porter, provide the analytical basis upon which you can decide your generic strategies. Now, when you think about management accounting as a technology of analyzing to help the decision making, now you will understand the management accounting is now moving away from mere numerical number-based calculations. So you have to have this particular qualitative analysis, which can be supported by various numbers. For example, calculation of the cost associated with specific supply chain connections. So the management accounting, when it comes to the analysis of the industrial context, when it comes to the analysis of the structure of rivalry, the management accounting has to, either through numbers or with other form of narratives, should provide an analytical picture about all these 5 forces. The nature of the existing rivalry among the firm, for example, the price stickiness, elasticity of demand, and so on, and similarly all other factors. Then your capacity to deliver either a cost leadership or a differentiation strategy depends on your internal system of production, your value chain. So that is where Porter brings in the value chain analysis. So you have to analyze very carefully how you produce your goods and services, how your goods and services or raw materials enters your system and how they are being processed and ultimately how they are being delivered to your customer. That's the value chain. And how this particular core process of logistics, production and outbound logistics are being facilitated by a set of infrastructural functions. infrastructural supports, such as HRM, accounting, finance, and so on. And the way that you are organizing this value chain, the way you are managing this particular value chain, the way you have been configuring this particular value chain determines the type of strategy, generic strategy that you can pursue. If you are going to adopt a cost leadership strategy, then your value chain should be designed to continuously reduce your cost, to manage your cost efficiently and effectively. So everything in your value chain is configured to manage the cost efficiently and effectively. So that is the ultimate necessity if you want to carry out a cost leadership strategy. Because your attempt is to reduce the cost as much as possible in order to create a greater value for money, while holding an acceptable level of value, benefit, or quality. Then similarly, if you are trying to have a differentiation strategy, then your value chain has to be designed, has to be configured to continuously innovate new features, new quality attributes, new elements in your products. So that's how you maintain your differentiation strategy. So value chain analysis is a very, very critical element. So you can read, there are loads and loads of books as well as online material regarding 5 forces model and the value chain analysis. So you can read them on your own and understand how this can be applied in specific scenarios. So my aim here is not to go in detail into them, but to provide the overall logic according to which all these Porterian discourses comes together. All these models and frameworks that the Porter introduced comes together. So we have a generic strategies, and the capacity of that generic strategies or the suitability of that generic strategies depends on the type of industrial structure that the particular firm operate, as well as the type of value chain with which the firm produces its goods and services. Similarly, you have to have an analysis of your immediate competitors, the manner in which your immediate competitors would react to your strategies, and how can you react to their strategies. What would be the specific strategic move that your immediate competitors would do in the next year in the market? For example, if you are Intel thinking about a computer processor, then the Intel has to very closely monitor the possible moves by the AMD. What sort of strategic move that the AMD would follow. And similarly, AMD should closely monitor what sort of strategic moves that Intel would follow. So not only a broad structural analysis of the industry, as well as a micro-organizational analysis of your own production system, your own value chain, you also have to analyze the possible reactions from your immediate competitors. It's like a game theory scenario. So if I do this, what would be the reaction from that guy? And therefore, if I do this, and if that reaction is what your competitor would carry out, then what would be my profitability? What would be my return on investment? What would be my market share? And that sort of analysis. For that sort of analysis, Porter brings in the 4-corner analysis framework. Yet again, you can read about this. There are a lot of books and materials online about this. So I let you there to read about them on your own. Now we can turn towards our third learning objective. That is to understand how these strategy discourses implicated on management accounting. Management accounting implications of these strategy discourses can be explained in three ways. First, management accounting now has to expand its mode of operation or domain of operation. More than simply calculating certain cost figures, income figures, profit figures, and so on, management accounting has to expand to a wider set of analysis, as we discussed here, to the analysis of the industry structure, to the analysis of the value chain, and to the analysis of the immediate competitive environment. So in that sense, management accountants now should be able to carry out an analysis of the structure of rivalry within which the firm tries to position its products, its brand, and its services. For that end, a certain numerical calculations will be very useful. For example, still we might have to calculate the cost, competitive cost, and our own cost and make some comparisons. But more than that, what is important is to provide a broad narration, a broad rationalization upon which a specific strategic decision can be made. So, for example, management accountant should carry out an analysis and say, in this particular structure of rivalry, it would be more favorable to adopt a cost leadership strategy or a differentiation strategy, either in a narrow market scope or in a broader market scope. Similarly, we should be able to carry out a value chain analysis, analyze our value chain, and accordingly rationalize, accordingly argue whether the manner in which we have configured our value chain favors a cost leadership strategy or a differentiation strategy. Can we follow a cost leadership strategy given we have this kind of value chain? Similarly, by analyzing the immediate response conditions of our immediate competitors, we should be able to say, if we follow this kind of a strategy, this would be the most possible reaction from our competitor. And if that reaction takes place, it would be our profitability implications, our market share implications, our return on investment implications, and so on. So we still may calculate specific numbers such as profitability, cost, market share, and so on. But they have to be driven toward the rationalization, justification of a particular strategic choice. So that is the implication number one, or the first implication. Then secondly, management accountants have to rethink about the manner in which they conceptualize cost, revenue, budgets, prices, and so on. We have to rethink about the manner in which we calculate our cost. We have to rethink about the manner in which we prepare our budgets. We have to rethink about the manner in which we control our employees, our departments, our machines, and so on. And in that reconceptualization of our management accounting activities, we have to provide a prominent attention towards the notion of activities. We have to think all those things as activities. So we have to reconceptualize everything we do across the value chain as a set of activities. We have to reconceptualize the industry. We have to reconceptualize the manner in which we can position our firm, our product, and our services in the competitive structure as a set of activities. We have to reconceptualize the manner in which we respond and react to our immediate competitors as a set of activities. And accordingly, we have to understand that it is the activities that drives everything. The cost, values and everything. So values are created by activities, costs are driven by activities. So every activity has to be analyzed on the basis of that activity's implications on cost, value and so on, and strategic positioning and so on. So therefore, we are now paying attention to, for example, activity-based costing, activity-based management, activity-based cost management and so on. So that is the second implication. Signification of activities as the basic building block upon which everything has to be constructed. And thirdly, we have to rethink about the manner in which we plan, we control and we perform our corporate operations. In other words, how do we manage our performances? So we have to think about how do we connect all our budgets, all our planning and all our activities and so on with this strategy. So how to create a link between corporate strategies or the positioning strategies and everything that we do in our company. So linking strategy with the operations. So for that end, we are now embracing techniques such as balanced scorecard. So we will be talking about those implications more in detail when we are talking about those specific topics in the forthcoming lectures. For example, we will talk about the connection between or the linking between strategy and operations in our balanced scorecard lecture or the strategic performance management lecture. And then we will talk about how activity-based management, activity-based costing and so on become crucial in managing the cost in our topic cost management. We will also talk about, for example, about quality costing and how the quality costing can implicate on our differentiation strategies in our quality costing topic. So these will be further discussed in our forthcoming lectures. Now, with that, we have reached the end of this lecture. So as usual, I will finish the lecture by providing a summary. Porter's grand schema of strategy started with a fundamental economic concept, the concept of competitive advantage, which tries to answer the question how and why a firm or a nation would outperform its competitors. As we know, this question has always been an interesting question for economists. And they have tried to answer this question in different ways using theories such as absolute advantage, comparative advantage, and factor endowment. Porter brings a different perspective through which he signifies the role of strategy. He brings the notion of strategy to the forefront of the analysis. For Porter, therefore, the competitive advantage of a firm or a nation would ultimately depend on the specific set of strategies that the firm would follow. Yes, it is true that the availability of resources, factor endowment, and the opportunity cost with which a firm or a nation can produce its goods and services do play a significant role. But more than these factors, for Porter, it is the strategy that would ultimately determine the competitive advantage of a firm or a nation. And Porter talks about competitive advantage at two different levels, macro political level and organizational level. At the macro political level, using his famous diamond framework, he explains that there are 6 key factors that determines the competitive advantage of a nation. And of these 6 key factors, strategies of the firm and the structure of rivalry within which firms compete is the most crucial, most critical factor for Porter. And that is this factor which connects the macro dynamics of competitive advantage with the micro organizational dynamics of competitive advantage, that is strategy setting. So when it comes to the determination of strategy, Porter explains that there are 2 generic strategies that a firm can follow, either a cost leadership or differentiation, which can be either in a very narrow market scope or a broader market scope. Accordingly, a firm can have 4 different strategic possibilities. Cost leadership in a broader market scope, or the cost leadership in a narrow market scope. Differentiation in a broader market scope or a differentiation in a narrower market scope. In determining which of these strategic possibilities are more appropriate for a firm, a brand, a product, or a service, Porter proposes 3 interrelated analyses. The analysis of industry structure or the structure of rivalry. For that, Porter brings out the Porter's 5 forces analytical framework. And then one should carry out an analysis of the value chain, the internal structure through which the firm produces its goods and services. So that is the value chain model. And thirdly, there is the immediate competitor environment or the immediate competitor's response situations, and for which Porter brings Porter's 4-corner analysis of competition. So having these 3 interrelated analyses, Porter argues that a firm should decide which strategy would be most appropriate for its products, services, and the brand. And this discourse of strategy implicate on management accounting in 3 ways. First, the management accounting has to expand its domain of operation and the mode of operation from being mere calculations into developing a narrative, developing a rationalization as to which strategic choices are more suitable for the firm. Then, secondly, management accounting has to reconceptualize the manner in which it carry out its all activities on the basis of activities. And thirdly, management accounting has to think about the manner in which the operational planning such as budgeting can be linked towards the strategy. How a particular strategic positioning in the market can be rationalized, realized, and operationalized through management accounting systems of performance management. So that is the overview of our lecture today, the summary of our lecture today. So, thank you very much for watching this lecture and see you again in the next lecture.